Hi, my name is Ron Brumbarger. I'm the president and founder of Struinova, a US-based innovation as a service business. We seek to assist companies to find new products, new services, or revamp existing processes that increasingly delight their clients. We do that by living in that estuary between the company and the customer, not in a sales role or a marketing role, but doing so through the process of an innovator in residence approach, where we have the ear of the customer and listening to the customer and understanding exactly what they're thinking about and working on and bringing that back to the team to improve our products and services.
Hello, and welcome back once again to the Inquisitor podcast with me, Marcus Kauke. Today, my guest is Ron Brumbarger. Ron runs Struinova. Struinova is a company that specializes in innovation as a service. And today we're going to be exploring the gap between innovation and stagnation. We're going to be looking at how companies and leaders need to adapt to the rapidly changing environment that we find ourselves in. Rapid, unwanted, forced change because of context. And what happens if you lose someone key in your business, like a top sales performer, or you lose a key supplier? How do you adapt? At the moment, there's so much uncertainty. Many people are being paralyzed by this. So what we're going to explore is, how do you adapt in a world where you have to thrive through the chaos? Ron, welcome.
Thank you, Marcus.
So could you give the audience 30 seconds on your history and how you came about ending up as an innovation as a service provider?
Sure, I'll give you the quick version. So I ran a web development firm from 92 through 2018, and we built a lot of websites over those years and several thousand projects and a couple thousand clients. So I had a vast experience set to build upon. I started a university to fill a talent gap that we had at our technology firm because I couldn't hire good people. And I had an opportunity to teach and learn creative problem solving and innovation. I sold that business 2 years ago, and since I've been teaching innovation and entrepreneurship, both at a local university here, private university, as well as to our clients. So fast forward to today, Struinova is the inculcation of those experiences, skill sets, mindsets, techniques, and tools to help organizations drive change and drive innovation within their company. Not just here's a new idea, but to do so through a teaching hospital approach that elevates the entire team's innovation mindset along the journey.
Very interesting. Okay, well, let's start with a couple of definitions then. What is innovation?
Yeah, great question. For me, I define innovation as net new products, net new services, or enhanced processes that increasingly delight clients. If it's just the next iteration that doesn't really have many changes to it, it's not really innovation, but it's new products, new services, or new processes, revamped processes that make clients smile, customers smile.
Excellent. Okay, so the next question is, in a world that is changing so rapidly, why is innovation critical?
Yeah, in the crazy world that we live in today, I define it as VUCA. If you're familiar with the term VUCA, it came out of the U.S. Army War College in the late 80s, early 90s, and was an attempt to define the current geopolitical atmosphere. We had one enemy, the Soviet Union at the time, and then suddenly we had a lot of enemies of different sizes, and some of them were friends and some of them weren't, and some of them liked us. So that changed the landscape a lot. And VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Fast forward 35 years from then. That's going fast, I guess. Fast forward 35 years, and it's certainly obvious that we live in a much more VUCA world today than we did just a couple of years ago. The volatility is certainly there, and uncertainty is everywhere. So businesses have to be poised and ready, kind of on their toes and agile to execute new processes and new services when things come about. Otherwise, you're left kind of watching it happen to you instead of making it happen for you.
Well, this is very close to my heart because I've spent the last 10 years preparing for this moment, because everything seems to be cyclical and we don't seem as a species to learn from history.
No.
And we're now at a point where there is deliberate instability that's being created. The trade war that's gone global. We're seeing a huge amount of capital being building up, waiting to pick up assets on the cheap as they struggle and as market conditions change. And I think what we're going to see this year is about 42% of mid-cap private equity firms will collapse because they don't really have the level of stability that they need The very large private equity firms have very deep pockets and they're playing roulette, and the small cap firms essentially have to stay very close to their founders. Whereas those mid caps, I think, are being squeezed, and many of them are still using a playbook that went out of date in February 2023, when Tiger, Y Combinator, and BlackRock, in the space of 1 week, changed the rules, and they said you had to collect cash and make a profit. And this was alien to many companies that were private equity backed, because interest rates had been zero for a long time. Now they're running at 8%. And if you took 100 million in debt, that means you've got to find 8 million a year to service the interest. And on top of whatever the interest was that you were being charged by your private equity, because they lent you debt. They didn't just give you money willy-nilly. So this has created all sorts of repercussions that most people were not prepared for. And you talk about something called inattentional blindness. Let's start with that. What is it, and why does it matter?
Yeah, inattentional blindness. So my wife would accuse me of being inattentionally blind to the dishes that are in the sink in the evenings. I just don't see them there. Or the boxes of tools that are sitting on the garage floor that I've stepped around for weeks and weeks and weeks. I just don't see them. Now apply that to the business world, where we're just so focused on execution and heads down into our business, and we just don't have the opportunity to see the ambient changes going on. We don't see the macro changes happening maybe on another continent or in another government or whatever the case may be. And we certainly don't have opportunities to look at the micro changes happening just within our business or with our competitors and our customers. It's just too hard. There are only so many hours in a day. And I don't know any organization today that has a sufficiently sized executive team that has their radar up looking for those things that are changing. And so you're naturally blind. So inattentional blindness is just the fact that you just miss the obvious because you're so busy focused on the work at hand.
Well, this then speaks to something else which is really critical, which is context really matters. And if a business and their leadership are not paying close attention to context, they're going to get wrong-footed. So when the trade war began, it suddenly meant that people who had offshored and had just-in-time manufacturing in China, all of a sudden had to rethink. They had to reshore, or they had to move to other jurisdictions. And for many people, what that meant was that their supply chain was being damaged. If the US decides to go down a Fortress America type of isolationist approach, then there's 12,000 miles of sea. Many thousands of miles are probably going to be populated by pirates. And that will affect your supply chain continuity. It will affect total cost of goods. It will affect total cost of ownership. And very few people, in my experience, are even thinking about this kind of thing. So I'm really curious what you do with your clients to help open their eyes to what they're blind to.
Yeah, that's a great question, Marcus. The ambient world that you just described, that those external forces pushing on the walls of businesses is certainly very prevalent. The biggest key is to develop the mindset of the executive team. I think that is first and foremost is developing an innovation mindset, followed by an innovation footing. In other words, I want to be receptive to, I want to humbly discover changes taking place. Arrogance is a great way to trip and fall. We see this all the time in business. Look around. So humbly pursuing new ideas and new opportunities with the right mindset enables you to have those receptors out there, and then the right footing. So head and toe. So then the right footing is I have a rock that I can push off of, not trip over, that I can push off of, that's going to push back at the equal and opposite force to allow me to go and grow. Without that, if you're walking around with your nose in the air, uh, potentially going to drown the next time we get a rainstorm, chances are your business is not going to be prevalent or present in the very near future because of that.
Well, this then speaks to another systemic dysfunction, which is businesses grow to a certain level where early stages, everyone's very innovative and rolls up their sleeves. But then there comes a point where middle management starts to feel that it's safer to knock good ideas down and to stifle innovation. So how do organizations and their leadership inoculate themselves against that?
Yeah, so I label that innovation friction. The world of innovation friction is very, very real. It's people saying, yeah, that's an interesting idea, but that might threaten my job. And I like status quo, as steady as she goes. Um, the biggest the biggest tool that I have in my tool chest when I'm trying to solve that problem is we put the opportunities and problems on a board. We put them on a whiteboard, we put them on screen, and we talk about them. And that helps diffuse it's your department that's not doing well, or it's this product that's late, what have you. So that pulls the focus off of individuals. If you sat at a circular conference table and suddenly you're looking across the table and it's easy to point fingers at your teammates. Whereas if the challenge and opportunities and new services, new products are on screen or they're before us as a team, we're all facing them together. And that simple approach, I know it sounds trivial. I've watched that simple approach diffuse very contentious conversations that have lasted for many months. It just diffuses it. Add a little meal in there, and things get really easy the second day. I do it. I do it all the time. It's just natural. It's human nature. Now we're not focused across the table. Marcus, your products are late. You're killing us. Customers are jumping up and down. Now we're looking at we need new products in the market, and now we're focused on the problem, not the individuals in the room.
Well, this then speaks to the shift in thinking away from product to the job to be done. And I think one of the big challenges that I see in most businesses is that they become very siloed. So you've got product, you've got marketing, you've got lead gen, you've got sales, you've then got the customer success, you've got account management. And all of those silos are not putting the customer at the heart of everything that they do. And everyone is trying to do their very best, but they're all running around in contrary directions and hurting one another. They also don't think about the consequences of, well, if I do my job, what's the ripple effect further downstream in the value chain? And I think where so many organizations go wrong is they're not looking at their business as a system. They're looking at it through its component parts. And each of them is probably tasked in different ways. They're measured in different ways. They're compensated in different ways. And those are contrary to the overall benefit of the business and the customer. So let's start with how leadership can grab the bull by the horns and address this systemic dysfunction.
Well, first to be orient everybody in the org chart toward the customer first. How do you get everybody looking at and focusing upon the customer is the priority for what we're doing? I don't care what your job is. I don't care if your job is mopping the floor at night. You're mopping the floor so that the people come in tomorrow can work and can provide products and services that make the customer happy. So if you have that mindset, that view, how do we delight our customers? It's really hard to start sort of pulling against that. That's how you get your bills paid. That's how you get your income. So that would be my first approach to do that. And second would be, I agree with you. I've worked with many large companies over the years, and people pass one another in the hallway and they just give a nod. They don't even know each other, and they see each other 20 times a day. So how do you drop the guards and build those intimate relationships that allow an organization to thrive? And we don't think about that. We just think silos, execute, do my job, leave at 5 and go home and come back tomorrow and repeat. Well, there's no way to survive in a crazy VUCA world without that focus on a customer and those intimate interdepartmental relationships that happen in businesses.
So let's look at some blind spots that are natural traps for organizations and leadership that then create this negative ripple effect.
Well, the first one would be, and I have worked with and built many SaaS companies over the years, not personally, but
Ron's
SaaS
holding
companies.
his head, but he's showing that he lost his hair from this.
Yeah, I had hair before I did this. And I didn't run any SaaS businesses, but we had many SaaS clients. And one of the things that always just floored me is these businesses would say, well, we have uh, you know, uh, an annual revenue and have annual run rate, ARR, and it's going to keep, it's going up, it's going up. Well, there's no guarantee that it's going to keep going up. Your big customer could leave you tomorrow that represents 20% of your ARR and you're toast. And so there's a piousness maybe that goes with it. I don't want to sound so negative, but there's a piousness that goes with it that says, well, our ARR is, $9 million a month and blah, 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 blah. Well, that's cute. But what happens when those three customers that constitute a third of that go away? Now, what are you going to do? You're not built for that. So I think one is that you can't take for granted that there's any such thing as it's not a GARR, guaranteed annual run rate. That's not the way it works. So you got to be scrappy. You got to be serving those clients, and that scrappiness helps then drive the relationships necessary to delight those customers. So I think just not expecting that last year's sales are going to be this year's sales, because they do go down and they go up. So how do you prepare for those things?
Well, to build on that, I think part of the problem is how many organizations measure and track their success. You've mentioned ARR, but the one that really drives me insane is EBITDA, earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. The only people who don't pay those things are private equity. Real businesses pay those things. And if you don't take into account interest and tax, which you're paying through the nose, and you don't amortize and depreciate your assets, then chances are you're looking through a very blinkered lens, and your perception is blinding you. So your perspective is blinding you to perception. And as a result of that, what I see very often is maybe they can see 15% of what's really going on because the money men are in charge. And that doesn't take into account the vagaries and irrationality of human beings, customers, suppliers, partners, employees, management, leadership. And all too often, we look at the data, we look at the single source of truth, which is the CRM, and it's lying to us. And we're making critical investment decisions or not. More often than not, the CFO is keeping money aside for a rainy day because they don't trust the forecast. And they're often overly dependent on one or two customers. And any customer that is worth more than 12%, one eighth of your turnover, is an existential threat. But what they do is they keep trying to grow that customer instead of finding more customers that can mitigate that risk. And so what I see over and over again is more inattentional blindness because they're blinded by the shiny objects, like, for example, new business, and they don't pay enough attention to retention and expansion sales, which cost you 1/6 to 1/12, and in some cases 1/21th, of what it costs you to acquire a new customer. And what you keep matters more than what you make. I would much rather have a $1 million business that's generating 900,000 in profit than a $1 billion business that's losing a few hundred million. It
Every
just
day,
doesn't make sense.
every
And
day. Yeah.
yeah, so again, I think we've got to start asking ourselves better questions. So, what are the frequently unasked questions that you keep having to raise with your clients? And they say, oh, yeah, of course, eventually.
Well, one, not to sound like a shameless plug, but one is what is the value or the estimated value of your innovation portfolio? Do you have an innovation
But what
portfolio?
is an innovation portfolio? Let's start with that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Great question. Sorry, I'm so deep into my own inattentional blindness world. I just assume everybody understands what an innovation portfolio is. So an innovation portfolio is a well thought out, well considered, well documented, we'll call it stack of prospectuses. That is the plural, by the way. I always wished it was prospecti, but whatever. A stack of prospectuses for each new potential product or service or revamped process that you might take to market at some point in the future. So it's well documented. The TAM SAM SOM is understood. The investment necessary to go to market's understood. The ambient conditions necessary for it to be successful is well considered. The resources for space and technology are available. The human talent is there, and we can enumerate all the things we need if we elect to execute and pull the trigger on one of those ideas in our pipeline. So the innovation pipeline is that list of or um, that stack of innovation opportunities that you might later take to market. So that's the innovation pipeline. So first, do you have that? And second, if you do, can you touch it? Can you quantify it? Can you estimate its value, its good, better, best elements in some form of value? My business way back, Bitwise, we had 10 items in our portfolio, and they weren't nearly sophisticated documentation wise as I'm imagining most businesses need to have. This was a long time ago. We sold two, and we made some money off of two of them just like that. And they were merely ideas that were well considered. So that was the approach. So how do you get to that point is the key.
Well, you mentioned TAM SAM, so I'd like you
Yes,
to define what they are, and then I'm going to have a dig um, uh, in a moment. But let's define what they are first.
sure. So I do my best to remember the acronyms here. I try not to play in the acronym crazy world as much as possible. So total addressable market, that's the whole world. If the whole world were aware of and could buy your product, that's TAM. That's the largest piece. So think of these as, in essence, concentric circles. The service addressable market or serviceable addressable market is how much can you legitimately reach? If all of TAM said yes, you can't get to everybody. You can't service every customer out there. So SAM is that smaller piece. That's how much could you actually service in that addressable market. And then SOM is serviceable and obtainable market. How much can you actually get to? And that's generally a pretty small number. So if you think TAM is 100, SAM might be 20, and SOM might be 2 or 3. So it's a pretty small number, but with each of those filters, you're increasingly telescoping in on an ideal customer in the ideal location with the ideal conditions in capital investment necessary to buy your products.
Lovely. Okay, so private equity gets hot under the collar and terribly frothy about the TAM. The TAM is unattainable.
Yeah,
The
it's a joke.
SAM
Yeah, yeah,
is unattainable. The only
right.
one that matters is the SOM, the
Correct.
serviceable attainable market.
Yes,
And this then speaks to ideal customer profile, the ICP. I've never been into a company where the ideal customer profile is written as the customer. It's all about how we can take money from these people on the basis that they're an A or B, how deep their pockets are, and what features and functions that they might buy from us. But next to nothing, no attention is paid to the job that the customer is trying to hire. And I
right,
think this is really critical. People do not buy your product or service outright ever. What they do is they rent it and they rent an outcome. And this is where so many organizations get it horrifically wrong and then end up spending their time chasing dead work. They identify this massive market. Then they spend a fortune on Cognism or Zoom Info and LinkedIn Sales Navigator. And they build these monstrous lists, which some poor sucker, probably an SDR or a marketing exec, then has to go through and filter. And on average, 99.9% of that activity results in talking to dead air or being told to go and boil your head. Well, the question going through my head is why not just never start that pointless exercise and identify who it is that will actually want to rent your product and create the conditions so they are attracted to you and they raise their hand. And the amount of money and time and energy and human life that I see squandered on pursuing the impossible dream of serving your private equity investors up with the TAM. It's just insane. And I look at the cost of this. You know, to run a typical SDR, a sales development rep, who is basically an overpaid telephone monkey. Sorry about that, folks, because I know a lot of you are. But you spend most of your time chasing dead air, and you've got somewhere between 5 and 25 grand's worth of tech, and they pay these people 30 to 90 grand, depending on how deep and stupid the pockets are of the owners and investors, in order to take 1,000 leads, convert them into maybe 200 that are considered marketing qualified leads. Then those get narrowed down to 40, 20 of whom are never followed up. And of those, you might get 7 to write a proposal to, and 3 to 1 might buy.
right,
Now,
right.
that strikes me as intolerably ineffective and inefficient. And if it were my money, I would rather buy lottery tickets. Your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I like the edict that some customers might tell you to go boil your head. I have not heard that before. Must be one of those Brit sayings. I'm going to borrow that from you if that's okay.
Of course.
I'll send you the royalty check. Uh, I agree with you. I think there is way too much VC private equity focus on TAM. It's a $9 billion market. Yeah, sure, but we can't get to all of it. It's an irrelevant number. It's an irrelevant number. And I've taught new product development through innovation and entrepreneurship for many years, and that's a great number. Just whatever. They don't even know what it is. Just put it down. I think one of the biggest keys is when you can, back to your point, when you can identify the right customer. What does that ideal customer look like? And you can get to know them intimately, and you can build trust with them, and then you get to understand their pain points and the challenges and the opportunities that they're trying to solve, the problems they're trying to solve. Then you can bring opportunities to them to solve it. So just blindly going after, what's this phrase? A blind squirrel, even a blind squirrel finds a nut every so often.
Yeah.
Well, that's a terrible way to run a business.
Yeah.
But if you can build those intimate relationships, and we did this at Bitwise, our web development firm, we found the right types of customers that really needed our kinds of services, and we built strong relationships with them to understand what they what they ultimately delighted in. And that takes time and it takes trust and it takes humility in the relationship to be there to say, we really want to work with you on a long-term basis. We want to develop a rapport and trust, and we'll be here when you're ready. We'll be here when things change. We want to bring fresh ideas. So that, I think that sounds simplistic. Maybe it's a Midwest U.S. Philosophy shining through that may not fly in Dubai or Singapore. I don't really care. I'm not in Dubai or Singapore at the moment, but the idea that you get to know your customer and you build that trusted relationship, and then you can execute opportunity finding with them together.
Well, I'm going to challenge you on that because I think trust never goes out of fashion. In fact, our entire business is built on the principle that trust is your operating system, it's
Sure,
infrastructure.
sure.
And we've worked out how you can measure trust as a hard metric. So you can put a dollar amount to what trust actually delivers to the business and to the customer. And I think one of the most important lessons I learned in the last few years, which I got from a pal of mine, Mark Schaefer, is you think as your customer, not about your customer or what you
Mhm.
can do to your customer.
I like that. Yeah.
And if you're not seeing the world as they see it, feel it, hear it, experience it, then chances are you're going to be off base. And if that's the case, you will lose customers. It will drive churn. It will also reduce the probability of attracting the right type of customer. And if your customer base is made up of people who aren't quite right, then that creates additional cost in your business because they will open tickets to your customer success people. They will be unhappy. And you have to remember that they're always talking behind your back. They're just not necessarily saying what you want them to.
Mhm.
And your brand is directly affected by this inattentional blindness, by this emphasis on the wrong end of the problem. In sales, if you're trying to make the sale, you've already lost because the customer doesn't care one jot about your target, your quota, your revenues. What they care about is, can you help me address my problem? And if I buy from you, will it come back to bite me? Are
Right.
you at risk? And in my experience, there are three filters that everyone makes important buying decisions through. The first one is risk. The second one is opportunity cost, which is risk. If I buy from you, could I have bought from someone else and got a better outcome? And then the third one, which by the time they get to this, the dust has settled, the moss has grown, the jungles come in, which is value. Now, it is critical, but in terms of making the decision, what they're doing is they're mitigating against risk. And risk is driven by uncertainty. And the brain's default setting to uncertainty is to go chicken little, that goes for the worst case scenario immediately. Now, what I see so many salespeople doing is they create anticipated buyer's remorse, which is a proper shot in the foot. Because if I create the perception of risk in my buyer's brain, it will default to the worst case scenario. And the brain does not differentiate between an imagination and
Right.
a memory.
Right.
What it
Right.
does is it now creates a forward memory of them having bought from you and then regretting it. And then you wonder why your pipeline's full of ghosts, why it's
Mhm.
constipated in the middle and nothing is moving through it. So we have to take a long, hard look in the mirror and ask ourselves, are we showing up right? Are we sending out the right message? Are we measuring the right things and driving the right behaviors? Because if we're not, we're creating problems for ourselves that could easily be eliminated. And this is where I love the idea of essentialism, which I describe as being intelligently lazy by design. How do I do the least amount of work and waste the least amount of effort, time, money, resource, and still achieve my outcomes? Well, I've got clients who run billion-dollar P&Ls, and they manage to do their job in 90 minutes a day by adopting this. Now,
Mhm.
I really like that approach
Yeah.
because they're managing to raise toddlers at the same time, and they have a life. And instead, what I see is people beating their head against the wall and blaming the wall for the headache.
Or
So,
somebody else. Yeah.
or someone else. Um,
Right.
so let's talk about developing product innovatively, because while I have you on, it would be a shame to waste the opportunity. So, how does one go about developing a disruptive product that customers delight in and makes it very difficult for your competitors to play catch up without being playing the game of being an also ran?
Oh, great question. Thank you. I love that question.
I thought you might.
Uh, Seth Godin created the metaphor of the purple cow. If you're familiar with the purple cow analogy and metaphor, um, I think that's a place to begin. And that is, how might we create a purple cow to go to market that's different, unique, rare, not commoditized. And then the second attribute of that is how might that purple cow live in a blue ocean? So I like analogies in case you can't tell by now. So
And
we start
mixing
layering, how do I find a purple cow in a blue ocean? Which is
them.
actually a great title for a book if you think about it. But how do we find that purple cow in a blue ocean? So it's that one thing that nobody's done before that exists in a market that's not yet developed. There will be someday. And as that ocean gets increasingly purple and then red, your purple cow becomes brown and you're just another shoe store. Doesn't matter. So those are some of the lenses that I would try to inculcate into the viewpoints of a leadership team and train on the innovation mindset. So how do you help people have that mindset to think about purple cows in a blue ocean? And so how do we develop that? And first thing that comes to my mind is the idea that innovation happens quickly. Let's go have an hour-long meeting. We're going to brainstorm a solution to this problem. Well, chances are the problem's been around for a very long time, and you and your piousness thinks that you're going to solve it within 1 hour with a team is probably highly, highly unlikely. So innovation just takes time. So I'll give a personal example if that's okay.
Please.
Uh, I needed people for my web development firm. It's 2012 and we're growing like crazy and we are fatigued in trying to hire people that could do the work that that gave a darn about what we're doing and wanted to be part of a team. It's really difficult. That year we were a $3 million firm, 30 people. And that wasn't reselling advertising. That was just our services. And we retracted proposals totaling $1 million that year in 2012. We retracted. So in other words, we weren't practicing after 20 years writing proposals. We were actually executing the proposals. So if we wrote it, we were pretty confident we're going to get it. So that means we pulled back proposals totaling $1 million. Well, that is a terrible business model to execute, and we had to have a way to fix it. So I thought about this for quite a time, and I thought, if I can't buy a solution, talented, motivated people, I'll build my own. And so we spent some time innovating around how might we grow our own talent, and I subsequently started a university to do it. Other examples would be this is way back in the early days of the internet when we still called it the World Wide Web. Do you remember those days? I was there. Um,
Dial-up modems.
yeah, the squeak and squawk. I was in the process of selling our house and we were wanting to move. And it's just an unrealistic concept to pay a realtor 7% to show people my house and tell me which contract to sign. It's just an incomprehensible number. So again, I'm solved the problem myself. So I built a business called Indy Fizbo. So I live in Indianapolis, it's often abbreviated INDY, Fizbo, FSBO for sale by owner. Purple cow, never been done. People had heard of Fizbo, that was common, but to do it in an aggregated online fashion was in 93, 94 was just not heard of. And so we built Indy Fizbo and we attracted hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of customers, maybe more, I lost track, to come sell their house online and have all the same traffic that you would get if you'd hired a realtor and do it for $300 versus 7%.
Yeah.
So those are great examples of purple cow. Nobody heard of. Hey, realtors have all kinds of websites out there, but this one I can sell by myself. That's our purple cow. And our blue ocean was this is a DIY. And we'll give you all the contract documents you need. We'll give you all the house prep tips you need. We'll even partner with providers that need to come in and replace carpet. We'll get you discounts, blah, blah, blah. So that was the idea of a purple cow and a blue ocean.
And so if an organization is looking to develop and innovate, what are the disciplines that they need to really start to think about and integrate within the business? And how do they create that cross-functional collaboration so that everybody is pulling in the same direction and they're all working towards the same outcome?
Some key words come to my mind. The first is humility. I sound like a broken record on this podcast now. The first is humility. That if that's not present, just you know, lock the door and go home. There's not much to build upon. The first is humility and understand what that means. The second is and we talked about this, is trust. Building trust not only outside with your clients but inside with your teammates. And then the third one I think is crucial is the art of empathy, the art of asking really good, solid questions to appreciate your customer's perspective. Those are the three ingredients that we can start with. And if we don't have those three ingredients to begin with, We're not going to understand what the client's needs are. We're going to make products nobody wants because we had them all figured out already. And we're going to end up struggling. Back to your example of 1,000 names and you get 2 customers from it. That's a horrible way to live. So I think it goes back to that humility, trust, empathy. Those are the 3 key ingredients I would pull from first.
Absolutely. And again, what we see too little of is marketing, management, and leadership going to listen to customers. Often they'll pitch customers and they'll think they know what the customer wants, but too few are doing genuine customer interviews. And if you're not familiar with Bob Mester's work, and that's spelled Moesta, read his book, Demand Side Sales, which I think is one of the best books that's ever been written on sales. And Bob was an engineer with 5,000 products under his belt, patented.
Wow.
And he was trained by W. Edwards Deming, by Taiichi Ono, by Clay Christensen. He was apprenticed to all of them. So he's got a phenomenal pedigree. But what's really fascinating is his approach to the jobs to be done customer interview, which starts from the first moment they realized maybe there's a problem and they couldn't quite put their finger on it, and mapping out their buying journey. One of my favorite examples is his mattress interview. They spotted a chap on CCTV who is almost at the checkout, and he walks past a mattress and he runs his hand across it. There's no sound. And he talks to his wife for a minute and he disappears for 5 minutes and comes back with a flatbed trolley. And then he puts his mattress on and they interview him. And it turns out that the journey started 4 years before because he had a bad back and they bought a really expensive mattress topper, which after 6 months stopped helping his back. And they only made the decision 3.5 years later when his wife's back started to hurt. But he'd done all the research. He knew more about mattresses than was healthy. And it mapped his journey going from first thought to passive looking, where you move from realizing there is a problem to trying to work out what it is and how you might solve it. Then into active looking, where you're exploring your options. At deciding, you make trade-offs. Do we need 5 bedrooms or 4? Do we need a second bathroom? Do we really need a dining room, or can we make do with a living room? Do we need a garden? What are the schools like locally? What are the transport links like locally? And once they've decided, first use, and this is where buyer's remorse will typically set in as well, because if expectation does not exactly match the real lived experience on first use, that's when your customer is looking for a way out. And that is a function of having a proper joined up marketing, product, sales, customer success, operations, and account growth mindset, where finance doesn't drive everything on the basis of how cheaply can we produce it and how much money can we squeeze out of them. It's focused on the long term. So when I work with my clients, I'm always starting the design from the third renewal, the third expansion sale, the third
Mm.
paid referral from an ideal customer to another
Oh,
ideal customer.
yeah, that's cool. I like that.
Well, it just saves you an awful lot of time trying to make stuff up and reinvent the wheel all the time, and then firing people, because it also then drives churn of customers and turnover of staff. You only have to look at the average chief revenue officer who survives 14 months. Salespeople hit their full stride in year 3.2, and there's a revolving door in sales.
Mhm.
Most of them never make it past a year. At the moment, this year in 2025, the average sales team, 30% of people are at quota, over halfway through the year. And most of them, 60% are not, 40% are not even at 60%. Now, that's a very big cost that's sunk. And it also means that there are a lot of miserable, highly stressed people whose brains are not thinking clearly and not capable of innovation or keeping their customers. Because when they're in that state, their brain is going to the worst case scenario. Every time the phone rings or an email pops up, they're waiting for the axe to drop. How is that healthy? We've got to do something about this. And if you're going to be a leader of a successful business, I think innovation starts in looking at your own dysfunction that's systemic. You get what you deserve, what you tolerate. And most organizations create the conditions for their own failure, but then they blame their people. And so, taking a leaf out of Taiichi Ono's approach to lean, you're hard on the process and kind to the people. So let's talk a little bit about the innovation around process.
Well, the one that I like is a methodology is kind of a hybrid of design thinking. I don't think there's any one particular innovation methodology out there that fits even 90% of the situations. I think you have to take the basic constructs of one. So let's just use design thinking, for example. And at certain steps through the process, you rip a piece out and you put in something better, or you add a step in there, or you jump across a piece because you need to do something differently. It's never as textbook as it sounds.
Mhm.
Anybody practices that has probably not been in the oven very long. But one of the things that I think about when I think about what you just described is the hurry up and innovate world that we live in is, as I mentioned earlier, people don't want to take time to innovate. It's like, well, can you come up with three new answers by noon? No, I can't. I can't go talk to nine customers to get three ideas. I can't do it by noon. It's 10 o'clock already. So we have this propensity to hurry through innovation. And this is a fallacy that you're going to be successful with that. And the second thing that I think about, which is it's very annoying, I think. It's frustrating. And sometimes you have to get people to pump the brakes and really see the long term of this, is that we want we want design thinking with one iteration.
Expand on that.
We want one iteration in design thinking. We want to spend a little bit of time gathering empathy. Okay, we got our empathy. Now let's go define the problem. Okay, we got our problem. Can we do that by tomorrow? Probably not, but okay. And now let's build our MVP. Okay, we have our MVP. What does the customer think of that? Well, go ask Joe. What does Joe think? He's our customer. And so we hurry through it and we get through the process. We come up with some innovative ideas and then we launch and we go, there it is. There's the product. Instead of saying, what is the littlest, smallest, least expensive, fastest, most simplistic way we can make Joe smile? Let's try that. And let's see how Joe reacts. And so we live in a world where, we used to produce, I don't know what the world calls it these days, but waterfall project proposals and project plans. We'd start a project that was going to last for a year and a half or 2 years. And we'd say, well, here are all the moving parts, and here's how much it's going to cost. Like we truly understood the static world of a website that was necessary. So the idea that we have a design thinking process of one iteration, hurry up and get the project done instead of what does this ongoing product development look like, and being mindful that it will take us time. And I think we're getting better with that. I think some of the SaaS companies are getting better with that. They're thinking about, monthly iterations and so forth. But I think the propensity is still, well, how much is it going to cost when we start? Well, we don't
Well,
know. We don't know what the journey looks like yet. So,
and that I think is the key. It is a journey. But you've touched on something else, and within SaaS and within PE-backed companies, I see this all the time, that the drive to reduce cost has meant that many organizations have fallen for the myth that you can replace human beings with technology. So AI, brilliant as it is, has some very severe limitations, and the way most people use it is atrocious. What they tend to do is more of what is already not working at scale, which I call scaling idiocy. Um, and the net result of that is in in the 1980s and 1990s, a lot of the luxury hotels got rid of Dave the doorman, and it was to reduce cost. The problem
sure.
is that people liked Dave because he knew them by sight and they were
Right.
regular customers. And when
Right.
Dave left, they stopped enjoying the experience quite so much. A lot of institutional knowledge is stuck in people's heads. And it happens when they brush past each other on a regular basis. Then they have the water cooler chats, or we have cross functional teams. And they're talking about issues that the customer cares about, and they work together on the problem with the customer. But it's all been thrown out the window for the sake of cost and speed. And the net result of that is what you end up with are these carbuncles and homunculi of really bad products that, in theory, are great, but no one's going to buy them. And if they do, they then live to regret it. And I keep seeing that. You must have seen a fair bit of that in your time. So I'm curious about the kind of missteps that people make when they sort of innovate, but in their haste, they throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Oh goodness, I'll give you a really simple example from the web development world. Not this could be any year from 1992 to 2018 that I was in that space, and after I've seen it as well. But we have a client come in and we would say, okay, well, tell us about your customer. Why are we talking about our customer? This is our website. We want to know who your customer is. Tell us about your customer. No, it's all the time. Marks, this happens all the time. This is common. Well, tell us who will be using this. And so they would give us the very high level overview of the persona canvas. They fill in half of a persona canvas for us and put an X in some of the other really critical ones that would serve to inform us in our work. That's not relevant. We don't care. And then they would say, well, I like blue. Well, I don't care what color you like on your website. I want to know what color does your customer like.
Hmm.
I want blue. And we'd go through this all the time. And this hard-headedness that was so evident, back to your earlier point, how do we focus on the customer? And so we would see this all the time where people would select behaviors and functionality and color sets and everything else based on their own internal desires for what that website might look like, for example, or what an apprenticeship might look like for a kid going through our program at Apprentice University. We need you to serve the student, not your particular apprenticeship. And somewhere in there is a meld between the two. Just the hard-headedness that comes about that ultimately, like you said, results in products nobody wants to buy.
Well, I'm just a moment to be miserable. Um, the customer appears to have become a forgotten afterthought at the end of a long chain of abuse. And
Oh, chain of abuse. Yeah.
well, I look at the way most organizations go to market. They blanket market everybody in the TAM. And if someone is in passive looking, they're not ready to have a sales conversation. But their website is full of book a demo, book a meeting. And so they get a whole heap of pipeline of people who are not ready to buy. Then they keep hitting them with dreadful marketing that's normally feature and function laden instead of what's the outcome that I want. And then the salespeople start pursuing them in the predator prey model. And no one wants to be prey. And they spend their time on not only expensive but dead work that creates more dead work for their staff, and then they beat their people up for being behind on quota, behind on delivery times. They attract the wrong people who then churn, and they're creating massive amounts of tickets for the customer success and operations people and they're asking for features that you're not ready to deliver, but they then go into the blueprint and you start adding them, and one or two customers use it, and the other 2,000 don't. Well, your job is to think as your customer. What's the journey that they are going through? What are the challenges that they're trying to overcome? What's currently impossible for them that if you could make that possible would change the game for them entirely? Because that's how you create a strategic moat. That's
Absolutely.
how you create a position in the market that other people have to play catch up, and how you charge premium, because what you keep matters more than what you make.
Right.
So,
Right.
what advice would you give to someone who's leading a business and it's got a lot of that old legacy thinking? How can they bring people into an innovation mindset? You've mentioned humility a number of times. Beyond that, what are the shifts in thinking and how can they measure what matters? How can they incentivize what matters to drive the right behaviors?
Great question. A couple thoughts come to mind. First is it's really hard to be your own dentist. You heard me say this in our previous conversation that during COVID, you probably heard about that. During COVID, it was a big deal. Uh, Many guys were walking around with a mullet. They could trim the front of their hair because they could see it, but the back was kind of dangerous, and nobody really wanted to get in there with clippers or have their wife do it or whatever. So there were a lot of mullets going on during COVID. Um, Conversely, I'm sure there were certainly people, at least in this country, who tried to be their own dentist. I got a toothache, and I actually have a video I can share with you sometime on this. I have a toothache, and I can't find a dentist that's open, and so I'm going to do a DIY tooth filling video on YouTube. And but that's exemplary of the challenge inside businesses is you need a catalyst to help you clear the fog and to find that purple cow to put in a blue ocean. You need a catalyst to do that. So that's the first point. The second point is back to my estuary analogy is, Steve Jobs said that, and I'll just paraphrase his quote, and whether you like Jobs or not, he's a smart guy, was a smart guy. His quote was that The innovation occurs the closer you get to your customer. And so
Mhm.
if you think of the analogy I use for Struinova is we want to live in that estuary between the company and its customer. That's where we want to be. And we want to be swimming in our estuary waters. By the way, our estuary waters are without crocodiles. I was just in Costa Rica and I didn't want to play in those estuaries. I wanted to play next to the beach where it was safe. So in our estuary, there are no crocodiles, but we want to swim closer and closer and closer to the customer side of that estuary. We know our business. What we don't know is have an appreciation for our customer. So swimming closer to the customer in that estuary and having that catalyst to drive and help motivate innovation within. Those are my two tips.
Excellent. Okay. So we're coming to the tail end of this conversation. So you've got a golden ticket and you can go back to the age of, I don't know, 23, and you could whisper in the ear of the idiot Ron, who thought he knew everything was immortal and invincible. What bits of advice would you give him that undoubtedly he'd have ignored, but would have benefited him?
Well, that's a really great question, Marcus. Thank you. I think the first thing that I would tell that knucklehead is something I tell every 20 something out there that I have the opportunity to work with, and that is secure a small list of lifetime mentors. Can be cross gender. This isn't a guy thing, girl thing. Secure a very small list of intimate relationships that you can lean into for professional, for personal, for spiritual, for marital, who knows what it might be, parental. But find some people outside of just your mom and dad. And there's certainly very valuable people in your life, of course, but find mentors that you can really, really be raw with in a very intimate relationship. That would be the first one I would say. I didn't have that advice when I was 23. I've been dishing it out pretty hard for the last 10. And I've been very blessed and fortunate to serve many young adults who kind of took my advice. So I kind of didn't. Um, so that's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I would say is when you find those people, be a willing mentee. Don't be an idiot. No mentor wants a reluctant mentee. It's like sweeping the beach. There's no joy in sweeping the beach or raking the lake. It doesn't matter. It's a terrible experience. So be the mentee that every mentor wants. And that would be my second advice. And the third thing would be that I think the phrase that I use a lot for the proverbial knucklehead at 23 is have some urgency about your agency. You do not have to wait on somebody to give you permission to execute to do something that's of interest to you. So do it thoughtfully, carefully, well considered. Don't be stupid jumping off of a cliff, but have some urgency in your agency and figure that out. You don't have to follow the path that everybody else has taken in their life and their career. You can follow and make your own path, but do so with urgency. Do it so that it's your path, not the path that others always take. So mentor would be the first one, and put urgency in your agency.
Both of those are fantastic bits of advice. I'm going to build on them. The first one is if you're, and whatever age, but especially if you're young, go onto LinkedIn and identify people whose history is your future and write to them. And it goes something along the lines of this: Ron, your history is my future. Cheeky ask, would you be willing to be my mentor for 20 minutes a month? My commitment is this: I will always come prepared. I will commit to take the action that we agreed at the end of our call. And any time that I fail to keep my promise, I will fire myself. Now, I've had clients who do this and they get 12 mentors. And this is a great way of also building a bridge to future employers. Because if you're smart, you'll find people who could employ you at some stage as well. And
Mm-hmm.
you've got a head start because you're not then operating in the advertised recruitment market. You're working with personal relationships. And Ron mentioned intimacy. Intimacy is the most important part of the trust equation. Trust equals credibility plus reliability plus intimacy over self-orientation. And the intimacy piece, Charlie Green is one of my mentors, and he was one of the co-authors of that. And he says that intimacy is far and away the most important, and the least important is credibility. The second part of this is understanding the difference between risking and sacrificing, and most people confuse the two. Risking is going from low to high value with the possibility that you might lose some or all of what you've got. and you shouldn't risk more than you're willing to lose. Sacrificing is going from higher value to losing value, and there is no upside. And when you're being intentional about your agency and you're acting on it, the key is to take plenty of risks, maximize your risk, and do it in small chunks. You don't have to boil the ocean. Go out and take tiny little risks
Yeah,
and do lots of them iteratively and adopt the scientific method. So keep a journal, work out what works and what doesn't. And if it doesn't work, then when it doesn't work, come up with 3 ways of making it work and then test those. And you'll find that if you go running towards the sound of gunfire, go looking for people who can prove you wrong, and go looking for evidence that you are wrong, you will learn a lot faster than those people who are waiting for permission.
every day, every day.
Ron, this has been very, very instructive and extremely good fun. What are the books, podcasts, content that you would recommend people go and pay attention to if they want to be innovators, if they want to get more agency in their life?
I listen to the Y Combinator podcast, not because I necessarily believe in the Y Combinator business model or trust those guys or whatever. They just have some fascinating interviewees on there, and I really enjoy listening to their podcast. The other thing that I think about is align yourself with people who see business opportunities and challenges differently, whether that's podcast, books, articles, or just in person, to get a different lens into problems that or opportunities that you might be facing. I think the biggest key is somebody that's looking for that person that asks childlike questions. Why are we doing it this way? And not to be a jerk, just help me learn and understand the journey that you took to get to where we are now doing this, whatever it is we're doing. I had a professor in college, and I'll end with this point. He was the worked for Ball Corporation, and he was the materials science guy that led the research and development on the uh, shuttle program heat shield tiles, not the glue, not the part that failed, the
Or the
tiles.
O-rings? Yeah.
So he led to work on the tiles, and that was his baby. And he had a quote, a phrase he would say, and I kind of picked up on this about maybe, I don't know, the fourth or fifth time because I was kind of slow. He would say, "Well, that's interesting. We should be curious." And I like that. I like living that way. I like thinking about, well, what can I learn from that? And so I'm infinitely curious about so many things. I find so many things interesting. I want to be curious about it. But curiosity is it's an active commitment to learn and pursue, not a passive, let it hit me between the eyes. So that's I don't have a good list for you at the moment, Marcus. Sorry. Y Combinator would be the one that would come to my mind. There's surely more out there. I know Seth Godin has a series of podcasts and books and name it, he's done it, kind of thing that would certainly be worthy of listening to. Um, I read HBR magazine. I thumb through it. I wouldn't say I read it cover to cover each month, but I read HBR. They do a pretty good job of keeping tabs on kind of the pulse of what's happening, and they talked a lot about VUCA long ago. They talk a lot about AI these days. And by the way, AI makes more VUCA. That's the way it works. So they talk a lot about those kinds of things. So I would kind of be listening there as well.
Well, I would recommend the Breaker podcast by Bob Mester. And I would also recommend a couple of books by one of his mentors, Clay Christensen, The
Mhm.
Innovator's Dilemma, The Innovator's Solution, and Competing Against Luck. And I would also pay attention to the Toyota way in terms of lean. The way organizations apply lean is just wonderfully iterative and collaborative if it's done well. I remember seeing a video of one organization, and they were teaching people every morning for 10 minutes. So, for example, how to sharpen your blade if you are opening boxes and moving stuff around. But it makes a difference because if everyone is saving 3 minutes a day and there are 60 people, that's 180 minutes that you recover every day. And it's those tiny improvements that make all the difference. And innovation doesn't have to be earth shattering. You're looking for the smallest thing quite often that will delight somebody, make the work more interesting. If you can create the conditions where people can do their best work every day, you'll have a lower turnover problem, which
Sure.
means that your recruitment costs will go down and you'll keep more profit because more institutional knowledge will be embedded within the business.
Your comment about the small improvements reminded me of one of the books I would suggest as we're wrapping up the book list here is James Clear's book, Atomic Habits. I love his story of the British cycle team that's in there that they wanted to improve 0.1%, 0.1% per day, or 0.01% per day. And 0.01% per day of improvement is 34% a year. Now, those of you that don't know how to do that, call me and I'll teach you the math. But it's an exponential approach. And so the idea of how do you incrementally improve a little bit each time, which full circle back to our design thinking approach. What if each iteration in our design thinking approach for a new product or service was just 1% better each time? Just 1%. That's all we care about. We might get faster at spinning that cycle a little quicker each time, but if it's just 1%, that's great. That's a huge improvement over time.
With that, Ron, how can people get hold of you?
So our little website is struinova.com, struinova.com. I'm on LinkedIn, Ron Brumbarger. There's only one of me around, so it's not like Bill Smith, easy to find. I'm on LinkedIn. My email is ron@brumbarger.com. I try to keep it simple. That's how to find me, and sort of a closing remark, I guess, on, in essence, what Struinova is all about. That's interesting. We should be curious.
Well, with that, I'd like to thank Ron very much for a fascinating conversation. And if you're looking for a way to, in an intelligently lazy way, to drive up your sales, drive up your profits, the money that you get to keep and invest, then drop me a line. You'll have all of my details on the blurb, but the best place to find me is on LinkedIn. And in the meantime, stay safe and happy selling.